Welcome to the Eden Home Resort channel. This is part 2 of the message, The Final Call. In part A, we described Remember Lot's wife, and in part 2, we will talk about the sudden thunder. Suddenly, as a thunder pearl from an unclouded sky, fell balls of fire on the doomed capital. Balls of fire fell on Sodom and Gomorrah. And this is a warning for the time of the end. Let us continue our study and delve into the 12th chapter of Daniel. We demonstrated already two timelines, one starting with the National Sunday Law in the United States and the other one being the Universal Sunday Law and ending with the Feast of Trumpets. If you have not understood it, I recommend to you to go back to the previous part. In Matthew 24:15, we hear Jesus talk about the abomination of desolation standing where it ought not. And I showed in previous parts how this was fulfilled on the 23rd of September 2050 when the man of Rome was standing in the White House where he ought not, in a country where church and state were supposed to be separate. And this was a fulfillment of prophecy. And if we apply this fulfillment and use this date, the 23rd of September 2015, as a starting point for a 7-year period, and we will come to the fall of 2022 with the Feast of Trumpets. And as we know from the Jewish calendar when this date will be, we know it falls on the 25th of September, sundown that year. So if I apply now time to this whole timeline, we will realize that the United States Sunday Law will have to be published on January 30, 2019, just a few days ahead of us. And then the Universal Sunday Law would be on April 15, 2019, if my calculation, of course, is correct. If there would be another feast day that Christ would come back, it could be different. But I suspect and I believe that the Feast of Trumpets is the correct feast to apply to it. Respectively on the dates, the people in the United States, especially the Seventh-day Adventists in the United States and Seventh-day Adventists in the rest of the world, have on the respective dates with the National US Sunday Law or the Universal Sunday Law, they have to make a choice between Christ or Barabbas. And we read in Review and Herald from January 30, 1900, there can only be two closets. Each party is distinctly stamped, either with the seal of the living God or with the mark of the beast or his image. Each son and daughter of Adam chooses either Christ or Barabbas as his general. What struck me one day when I heard this statement again was the date when it was published, January 30, 1900. And I thought it was actually while I was dry fasting, I was wondering, haven't I heard this date before? Haven't I calculated it somewhere before? So I looked up in my notes and I found out if the end of the 7-year period would be 2022, I would come to January 30, 2019 as the starting date for the United States National Sunday Law. And so I started to wonder even more, or believe even more in the message that I understood before, that God maybe used the publication of this statement as another hint that this will be coming true, just like it happened with September 11, 2001. It was published in volume 9 of the Testimonies to the Church, starting page 11, the chapter called The Last Crisis, and on page 12, talking about New York. There is a warning and a promise. And we read the promise in Matthew 24. Except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved, but for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. So there is sudden thunder once when this law will come in place, and I believe at the end also the time will be cut short, the way I would interpret this, because otherwise the wicked people would destroy all the saints before Christ would come back, and Christ would not want to have that happen. So we have to make our choice in time between Christ or Barabbas, or the seal of the living God and the mark of the beast or his image. What happened in the time of Lot? Someone was interceding for Lot, and it was Abraham, because before the angels came to Lot, they visited Abraham, and Abraham was bargaining with Christ for the souls in Sodom, and he finished with 10 souls. If 10 souls would have been in the city would have been not destroyed. So we can hope that in the big cities there will be found 10 souls. For 10 souls, a city would be spared. But in the case of Sodom, there was only one found, and that was Lot, because Lot's wife, she was saved originally, but she turned around. And his daughters, they had a wicked spirit like the rest of the people in Sodom, and some wicked nations came out of them. Only Lot was saved at the end. And why? Because Abraham was pleading for it. We read in Genesis 19, verse 27, and Abraham got up early in the morning to the place where he stood before the Lord. And he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the plain, and beheld, and lo, the smoke of the country went up as the smoke of a furnace. And verse 29, and it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham, and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot dwelt. This reminds me of a statement from Ezekiel, where there are men with a slaughter weapon and one man with an inkhorn, and that man was clothed in linen, Christ going around and sealing his people. And where does he make a seal? Where the people are sighing and crying for the abominations done in Jerusalem. So let us pray and plead for our brothers and sisters that are still in the cities to come out. Let's sigh and cry for the sad things we see happening in our church before the Lord, because that is the spirit of Abraham, and we ought to exhibit that spirit if we want to be saved, if we want the writer with the inkhorn seal us with the seal of the living God. The multitudes will mock at the message of warning, like the dwellers in Sodom, they will be awakened only when it is too late. Suddenly, as a thunder peal from an unclouded sky, fell balls of fire on the doomed capital. I hope that it will not fall on your city, that there are enough souls in there so that you have time to get out. There are scary statements written by Ellen White. One where it talks about the destruction of thousands of cities. You find that in Review and Herald, September 10, 1903. Thousands of cities. This is still ahead of us. And she writes in letter 278, 1906, I could behold terrible conflagration. Great balls of fire were falling upon houses, and from these balls fiery arrows were flying in every direction. I believe this time is right ahead of us, and I believe this time will start in the United States on January 30, 2019. And for that, I have to tell you a report that I heard once in the radio when I was listening in Austria. And this report was especially for Vienna, for big cities, and it talked about an emergency plan for the city. And the people who are part of the government, they have in their wallet an envelope, a sealed envelope, and they are supposed to break the seal when some big crisis will happen. The crisis was not defined. But they were supposed to break the seal right away because they would only have 2 hours to leave the city, because after 2 hours, a city would be blocked by the armies and no one could get either in or out. You know what that means? No food supplies will be brought to the cities either. The stores will also be closed. People will receive food stamps and their rations that way till everything is gone. And in this report, they recommend to the people to store up in their apartments at least sufficient water and food to get you over an at least 6-month period. Of course, in an apartment that is close to impossible. And with that, my recommendation is to follow the recommendations of the Spirit of Prophecy. Flee to the mountains. Leave before January 30, 2019 sundown, or for the rest of the world, April 15, 2019. Well, this was the sudden thunder. But there's a message in the Bible in Revelation 10 talking about 7 thunders. And those I will publish after January 30, 2019, because I believe that will give us a clearer understanding of what's ahead of us at that time. But I like to see first the fulfillment of the sudden thunder on January 30. And that will see that with that we can see if my message or my calculation is correct. And I wanted to present this message so that you can make your choice. Study this issue, if this could be true for you or not, and act accordingly. Don't rely on my word. I know it's a sudden, scary message, but the events tell us that we are even at the door. And I hope that you will not be before a closed door. That's my prayer for you.